right, guys, we're here with Don Higgins. You're going to recognize Don. He's on YouTube. He's everywhere. We've got it. Let's see. Don Higgins. He's got HigginsOutdoors.com, Chasing Giants podcast. He's the author of Real World Hunting Icons and Hunting Trophy Whitetails in the Real World. He's penned articles in every major whitetail magazine known to man. And he's harvested, this is the big thing, he's harvested multiple 200-inch bucks over the years. So welcome, Don, and it's really good to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start off with this. Okay, so this year with the COVID and everything, with all the people going out, a lot of people have bought hunting properties. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Real estate's red hot right now.
So if someone is going to go out there and buy a piece of hunting property, what's the first thing that they should really consider before pulling the trigger on that?
What lays around it? What lays around a property is more important than what's on the property. You can, influence, change what's on your property, but you have very little influence on what's around it. So you need to pay close attention to what's around the property before you buy it.
So if you've got a piece of property that's up for sale and it's surrounded by soybean fields, that probably is something that can help you and hurt you at the same time.
Right. You can take a 10-acre property that's nothing but an open field, and if it's sitting next to 1,000-acre no hunting sanctuary, well, you got it made. All you got to do is provide 10 acres of food, and you're going to kill some deer.
Yeah.
But, what lays around is way more important than what's on it.
Well, that answers that question. That was one of the other questions I had, was how important is the surrounding property that you have?
If the property you own, if it's all wooded, you need food. You go in with a dozer, you clear some plots, you got food. If it's open country, you need cover. You go in, you can plant native grasses, or you can plant trees or whatever, and you've got cover.
Right.
You can't do that on the neighboring property, so you're stuck with what's there on the neighbors. So you need to really check out the neighborhood more so than the property you're on.
Okay, so that said, in your opinion, what is the number one beneficial project one can do to their property, and what is their first step?
Well, that varies by property. I always talk about looking for the weakest link in the neighborhood. If you're in an area that's essentially nothing but woods, you need food, and the more food you can provide, the better your property is going to become. If you're in an area like where I'm at, where there's just thousands and thousands of acres of open ag fields, cover's the key. Mm-hmm. So it changes by property.
Mm-hmm. What is your basic soil composition where you guys are?
Well, I live where there's some of the richest soils on earth. Very, very rarely do I ever fertilize a food plot.
Wow.
Our soil is black loam, so it'll grow anything. 200 bushel corn here is absolutely nothing. Last year we had a fantastic growing season, and I'm sure there wasn't a field in my county that didn't grow 200 bushel corn.
Holy cow! What about pH level? Is the pH level good there too?
It's really good. Now we do have to add lime once in a while, but I'm talking like every 5 to 8 years we add a little lime, and then we're not talking more than about 1,000 pounds, half a ton per acre, where a lot of areas you're adding multiple tons per acre just to get something halfway decent.
Yeah,
we've got it. We could just about go for a long time without adding any.
Let me throw a number at you. I've got a guy in Maine right now that I'm working with, and he told me his pH level, and I nearly fainted. 2.8.
That's the lowest I've ever heard.
Yeah, me too. They're close to the coast, so it's basically sand and clay.
Yeah.
So in a case like that, we're trying to build the soil back up. Says there's no loam in it at all.
Right.
So it's a challenge. It's basically, I think I'll be bald before this is over.
Oh, it's going to take years, if not decades, for him to have a decent plot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he said this is a lifelong project, so it probably will be for me too in that sense. So,
Yeah.
now it's kind of funny too, because you're talking, where you guys have a lot of open ground. We're the second most forested state in the union. So when you're talking about planting trees, we're talking about cutting them. So as far as that said, when you guys are looking at trees, what kind of trees do you do a lot of planting of, other than, thermal cover and then your mass trees? Is that what you're basically going for?
Yeah, a lot of times, but we also plant a lot of soft mass trees, persimmons, pears, apples, crab apples, get into some chestnuts.
Do you have a favorite?
I really don't. What I like is something that's that's very rare for that area. So I want the deer to be able to find food sources on my property they cannot find anywhere else in the neighborhood. So if it's an area where there's no persimmons, I want persimmon trees. No apples, I want apple trees. And on down. And diversity is key also. So I want some of everything. The more food sources I can provide, the better.
Is there too much that you can do as far as food?
I don't, not in most cases. Diversity, I mean, you can provide more than the deer will possibly eat. But I think when you diversify and allow those deer, a deer has a natural ability to balance his own diet. And the more different plant species he has to choose from, the better he can do that. So one plant may be high in, say, vitamin A or whatever, and the next plant's high in, zinc. Or if a deer's got all these, a couple dozen different highly nutritious food sources, then he can balance his diet. His body will crave what it's lacking, and he can balance his diet and maximize his genetic potential that way.
Is there any specific manner that you plant your fruit trees in? As far as how do I want to say it? How you set them up? Are you setting them up in a way that's easier to hunt, or is it mainly just you have to plant say apple trees in a way so they work well with each other?
Well, a couple things. One, I want to plant those trees near my food plot. So a lot of times right on the edge, I'll surround that food plot with fruit trees. I don't want, when a deer gets, I'm a big fan of fewer but bigger plots. So when a buck stands up from his bed in the afternoon, he wants to go to a food source. He doesn't have a dozen different options. He's got two. And that's where the big plots come in. And then, I plant the various fruit trees around the edge of that plot. So, instead of, having one food source there, I want to diversify. I want to have as many diverse food sources at that one location as possible. But when it does come to planting the trees, I want to group them by species. So, and it helps with pollination as much as anything. But also, as that particular tree species is dropping fruit, they're all clustered together, not just randomly scattered. So let's say I've got a food plot that I have fruit trees planted on three sides. So one side may be pear trees, another side may be persimmon trees, and another side may be pear trees. And that aids in pollination, but it also creates more huntable patterns.
Do you guys run bees?
I personally don't, and do not have anyone doing that on my property.
Yeah. As far as the difference between the fruits, is there one that is there a distinct, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not preference, but is there a timing between whether they eat the pears first and then they go to the apples or the persimmon? Is there a way seasonally that you go for each fruit? I guess I think that's a good way to say it.
Well, not exactly, because like for apple trees, for example, I'm selecting those varieties of apple that are going to drop later in the year during hunting season. A lot of apples will ripen in summer, especially late summer, before hunting season's even open. So I'm selecting my apples for two things. One is a late drop, those species that are going to, or those varieties that are going to drop later in the year. But then I'm also looking for the most disease resistant varieties too, that, will do well without me out there spraying and pruning and everything else. I want them to produce fruit with minimal care.
Yep. What zone are you guys in?
We're in zone 5.
Zone 5. It's kind of the same as ours. We're not that far off. I think we're 5A or 5B. So we're 4. No, we're 5. My producer, she's always chiming in to correct me. You're a married man. I think you know what I'm talking about.
I've got one of them too. Yeah.
Yeah. So here it seems like the deer will flock to the pears first. If you have an apple tree and a pear tree dropping at the same time, they're on the pears. That's their first choice. But if you have acorns, all bets are off. That's their first thing they're going to go after. So, you guys you have oak there.
We do.
What species?
We got the white oak, bur oak, swamp white, red oaks, pin oak, shingle oaks. I think the reason that you're probably seeing that is probably the fat levels in those acorns. The deer, when they're dropping, it's just natural for those deer to want to consume that. They crave it because they're trying to put on fat for the winter. Yep. It's just nature's way as prepared them, for survival. Here in the Midwest, they absolutely hit the acorns. Don't take this wrong. They absolutely love them. But I don't think we see the transition to the acorns to the degree that a lot of other regions do. And it's probably because we've got corn and soybeans and some other high fat food sources where the deer can use those to put on the fat for the winter.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause the way it is here, if you're running a food plot and you're in a year with no acorns, you're gold. They're going to be on it. But I've had so many people just get so frustrated with food plots because if they're in an area that has a good, southeast point with a ton of acorns on it, as soon as they start falling, the deer don't come to the food plots anymore. So it's really hard to hunt the food plots. So basically the way we set them up is our food plots are basically for that summer growth. And then we worry, depending on the acorn crop, then we go from there. It's a dramatic change. It's a huge shift. As soon as you start hearing them hit the ground, the deer are gone off the plots and off the field. So it can be pretty discouraging to a guy who puts a ton of money into one and then nothing's happening. So
we don't experience it to the degree that you've described. They'll definitely hit the acorns in the fall, but not to that degree.
No, I suppose if a lot of the guys here have a hard time doing anything with soybeans because first off, to get a soybean plot here to grow, you have to have an electric fence because in the summertime, they just destroy it. So, and a lot of guys aren't willing to do that, to set that up. So I would suppose if you did do that and you had a big enough soybean crop, they may shift that and come off the acorns. So that's something I try to get people to do is run an electric fence, but some people just don't want to listen.
Oh, that's the truth.
Yeah.
I can relate to that.
And I'm sure you run into that when you're on a consult or something and you tell people, to listen to what you have to say. You have the credentials to prove what you're doing is right. And people just want to do what they want to do.
Yeah, When I go on a consulting visit and meet with a client, I can usually tell within 30 minutes if that client's going to get it or if he's just wasted his money and time.
Yeah, it's
And some people just want you to tell them what they want to hear, and
yep.
that they're not open-minded. They're just looking for somebody to repeat what they're already thinking.
Yeah, well, you can get that just about anywhere. Any advertisement in any of the magazines or any of the TV shows, you can get all that. I think that the best thing a person can do, in my opinion, is get somebody who's going to tell them the truth regardless. And at least you can go to bed at night with a clear conscience that you did what was right. I know I do, but
right.
So is there a minimum acreage in a property that you look for that a person needs to kind of hold and feed the deer, or is it any size will do?
Hey, it all depends on the layout of the property and what's around it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if you're next to a huge no hunting sanctuary, it doesn't take too many acres to pull them out.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because you're the same. I'm hearing the same thing from you that people get from me, and people get aggravated because they don't understand that there's nothing that's rock solid in nature. There's changes in every season changes, every situation changes. And I'm writing these questions in a way that people will ask you these things, and mm-hmm. your answers are like mine, and people will say, you're so wishy-washy. Can't you give me a straight answer? It's like, I can't until I see, or we see what happens even next year. I'm going to give you options. So it's really funny to hear you say it like that, because you sound like I do. What is it? Okay, so what is a time frame a landowner will start seeing results after he starts implementing things that you suggest? As far as, is there a time frame, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, when they really start seeing the results if they follow what you tell them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I tell most of my clients to look at it as a 5-year process, that each year should get better than the year before to a certain degree. But what they really want to do is consider where they're at today and where they're going to be in 5 years. Mm-hmm. Now, there's some properties it doesn't take 5 years. I've done multiple properties this winter that next season they should see a huge noticeable difference mm-hmm. In the quality of their hunts. A lot of that's based on how they were doing things in the past. And if all you got to do, if you go onto a property and the only thing that's missing is food, but there's ample opportunity to provide that food, and if you do that in one growing season, you should be able to greatly influence or change the quality of the hunting on that property. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Again, I'm not trying to duck the question, but it can vary from one season to 10, really. And
no, I don't think you're ducking it. I think you're giving an honest answer, because, like you said, it all depends on, there's so many variables when you're dealing with whitetails and property, even from mile to mile. There's huge differences, and you have to take that all in consideration. When you're looking at a piece of property, do you take into effect historically what size deer have been taken around that property, and look at it in that sense that, okay, so, this area traditionally only produces deer that are in the 140s or in the 150s, and they've never taken anything else bigger than there, compared to a spot that might have had 190s or 180s at one time. Is that something you take into effect?
Oh, for sure. One of the questions I often ask my clients is, what's the best buck taken in your neighborhood on average each year? Neighborhood, I'm talking like within a 3 or 4 mile radius. Mm-hmm. And if the biggest buck taken year after year is a 150-inch deer, and he's wanting to grow 170s, well, he's got his work cut out for him.
Yep.
The other thing, I ask you, once they answer that question, they say, well, there's typically, you know, a couple of 150s shot in the neighborhood every year. And that's about as big as it gets. Every once in a while, there'll be one a little bit bigger. Well, I tell them that their goal needs to reflect what that neighborhood can produce.
Yep.
And I just try to be realistic with the, you know, the goals that we're going to set for that property. And if, you know, too many people, I think, have the idea that you can do some of these things they see on the internet, and within a couple of years, you're magically shooting 200-inch deer. Well, that's just not going to happen.
Yep.
And I think the internet has been, while it's a great, you know, resource, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And in fact, I've said on my own podcast numerous times that I think of all the deer hunting information, especially land management information that's out there on the internet, I think over 50% of it's garbage. Less than half of it's good info. Mm-hmm. And that's probably being real generous.
Yeah. That's the problem I see, especially when you're pertaining to the Northeast. The Northeast is tough. I mean, we have great deer. They grow great body size, but antler-wise, I mean, you can see the ones behind me. These are considered great deer here. And big bodies, just crappy racks comparatively. And that's even with really good nutrition. I mean, we're liming our fields. We're fertilizing every year. We've got great mass crops, everything. And it's just, they put all of their energy into body size. And the biggest deer I've gotten in this area is 140 inch. He's sitting over here. He was 260 pounds live weight. And he was a genetic freak to begin with, body wise, but he just never grew the antlers that he could. I mean, a lot of mass, short tines, that kind of thing that you see in New England, but that was with optimum nutrition, even after the cuts, with all the forage that we had here. So I don't know what's the state record in New Hampshire is 183 and 5/8, I think. Don't quote me on the eighths, but it's a huge buck for here. And if you're dealing with 183 inches as the biggest buck in your state, 140 inches is a pretty big buck for here. So, but in the last couple of years, we're starting to get bigger ones, 170s, 160s. So something's changing, and I'm not sure what, but it's looking good. So,
a good deal.
Yeah, I think so. Anyways, let's see. What's the next one on here? All right. Can you give an overview of the importance of being aware of what's happening? Oh, wait a minute. We're going to edit that one out because you already answered that. Yeah. Okay. So you yourself, you have built some really big bucks. All right. Do these giant bucks, do they have, they're outstanding examples, but do they stand out behaviorally from the other bucks that you've hunted, these 200-inch bucks? And did you see it from a young age with these deer, or was it something that they're just regular bucks and they just had a genetic predisposition to grow like that?
Yeah, these big giants are no smarter than any other buck. They're just, genetic freaks. It's no different than a 7-foot human being is no smarter than a 5'10" human being. Just a different body. In fact, one of my 200-inch bucks, the one I call Smokey, scored 206. I consider that to be the easiest buck I've ever hunted and killed in my life. He was just he was a homebody. He's pretty much stayed on my farm. He moved in daylight a lot, and I knew I was going to kill him. I went on podcast the summer before I shot him, and I said, I'm going to kill a 200 this fall. And that's the only time I've ever done that. He's the easiest buck I ever shot, but yet he's one of the biggest. Yeah, big bucks are no smarter. The 140-inch buck you just talked about, I'm sure it was a mature buck.
Yeah, he was 8.
He's every bit as smart as the 200 inches I killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we go for 200 pounds. You go for 200 inches.
Yeah.
So, yeah. See, I was wondering about that. I've always wondered. I've always had this thing with these bigger bucks, these more mature bucks, is whether or not there's something that much different about them that causes them to be harder to kill. And I don't know if it's that or people just aren't used to dealing with a mature buck.
Well, most people can't kill a mature buck if he had spikes on his head. So, I mean, most deer hunters, to be honest, that they just have no idea. And, you know, I've said it before. I think what holds back a lot of deer hunters is that they became very good at killing medium-aged bucks, middle-aged deer, you know, the 3-year-olds.
Yep.
There's a lot of guys out there that consistently shoot 2 and 3-year-old bucks, and they just cannot force themselves to change their hunting habits to kill the big ones. They've become so good at what they do that they just can't accept the fact that a 6-year-old or 5 or 6-year-old deer is absolutely a totally different animal than a 3-year-old. And I think it's the success that holds a lot of people back from killing the giants.
Yep, I agree. Do you think that what age group do you think it is that they do that major switch in their personality? Is that 5?
Well, I would say probably there's a big difference between 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. But there's also a big difference between 4 and 5.
Yeah.
But then I think they also reach a point where they become easier. I think once a buck hits 7, I think he then becomes easier to kill. And, you know, a couple of reasons. One, I think his testosterone levels are lower. So he's not, you know, he's not running around over a wide area looking for does like he did when he's younger. His home range shrinks. If you know where that home range is, you have a lot better chance of killing him. I think he's also become so comfortable that, you know, he trusts his instincts, and you know, he's evaded hunters for, you know, 6 years already or 7 years already. He just feels like he's become comfortable doing what he's done, and he just continues to do it, and he lets his guard down a little, if you will. And you know, I've seen multiple bucks that once they get past that about the 7-year-old point, they start showing themselves in daylight a lot more. They start hitting the food sources before dark more, and that home range shrinks. And I think they're easier to kill at 7. I would probably compare a 7-year-old buck to a 4-year-old buck.
Yeah,
I think the toughest ones to kill are the 5 and 6-year-olds.
I agree with that. Because this 8-year-old that I shot, he was running on a ridge, skylining himself all the time in the daylight, didn't care, felt like he had beat the odds, and he was just going to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. So, you know, basically I got him in the daylight, him coming down a ridge, because he just felt like he was safe. So, I mean, I let him go for a long time. I hunted him for the last 2 years of his life. And before that, I passed him as a 3-year-old, passed him as a 4-year-old, passed him as a 5-year-old, because I just kept thinking that he was going to grow more antler than he did. But I think I've been educated that once they hit that 5-year-old, they're really not going to grow a whole heck of a lot more. So there he sits on the wall. So, but yeah, so let's see. I want to really give you some really good ones here. So I wrote down so many. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Now, once you've identified that you have a giant residing on your property or a piece of property that you're hunting, what are the steps that you go through to pattern him and decide on a setup, and how long can that take you until you're successful? Obviously, your 206 pounder, you knew, and that didn't take as long. But
well, these bucks I'm hunting, I'm watching them grow up. Most of them I'm watching from the time. Well, at the latest, I start watching them as 3-year-olds.
Yeah,
and a lot of them I start watching at 2. But at 2 and 3, I start watching them, and by the time I'm ready to kill them at 6, I've got 3 or 4 years of history with them, trail camera history especially.
Mm-hmm.
I know what they're going to do before they do it, and I think that's a big mistake a lot of hunters make too. Is they're always a step behind. They use their trail cameras a lot different than what I do. They want to go out and check their camera once a week, and hey, I got my buck. He's in daylight now, so it's time to start hunting. No, it was time to start hunting a week ago.
Yeah.
And you're just late to the game. And if you've got that annual history, you know where a buck's going to be at what time of the year, and you can be there waiting on him.
Yeah, I'll agree with that one. I find that the first, when does your bow season start there?
October 1st.
October 1st. Okay. So ours starts in September 15th. Mm-hmm. So in September we have, in my opinion, and I'm not a great bow hunter. I'm busy on the farm during the September period, so I'm not doing a lot of bow hunting then. Most of the bow hunting I do is in October, the latter part of October, right when the pre-rut starts. But in September, it seems to me like the first 2 weeks in September is your best chance of getting that buck when he's still doing the feeding to bedding. Mm-hmm. Then after that, they get rid of their velvet and everything. They're starting, the hormones are changing. But I've always found that latter part of October is just, to me, the best. I don't know if you're finding the same thing, like right in and around Halloween.
Absolutely. The biggest buck I shot was in 2020. Shot him October 30th. So those late October cold fronts are as good as it gets.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that's? I think that's nationwide too. It seems like in the northern hemisphere, up here in our areas, it seems like October is when all the activity just starts to peak. And that's probably the best way. I mean, in New Hampshire, we have basically, in most of the state, it varies, but it's 7 deer per square mile, which isn't a whole lot. And I can remember 2 or 3 times in October in a sit and seeing 12 deer at the 12 bucks coming through, following 2 or 3 does. So I think that people are going to bow hunt. That's probably their best time to get out and do it if they're after a big buck. I mean, you can shoot does all the time, and right. You should, but.